to Treasures Galore. I am your host, Michael Elder, and in this episode, I want to go over the Forrest Fenn chapter in JCB's book, There's Treasure Inside. Now, if you haven't listened to the American Treasure podcast, it is on Spotify and I believe it's on Apple Podcasts now. If you haven't checked that out, go check it out right now. This last episode, I believe it's episode 3, was specifically for this box. He talks to JCB about the autobiography and some different things within it, and there was some stuff that caught my eye. The first is JCB confirms that, yes, this box is in one of the 4 search states. So, northern New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, or Montana. I made a previous video just going over the logic behind him hiding it within Forrest Fenn's search area. He was a dedicated searcher for 4 years, spent months within the Rocky Mountains, and just going over all of Forrest Fenn's stuff, logically, he would have hid this chest within the search area because in the poem he says it's near where I'd searched for heavy loads. So in this podcast, he does confirm, yes, it is in one of the 4 search states. Also, I believe he gave us something to look for. So in this podcast, he talks about confirmation bias. Now, that's a topic that he talks about in this book and has talked about quite a bit. But he talked about in his search area, he believed that he was going to find the box, just like all of us did, right? But he found a marking on this rock, and it resembled either a picture or some sort of drawing in Forrest Fenn's memoir, The Thrill of the Chase. And so he believed that Forrest was the one who marked the rock, and he searched in that area for I think he said a very long time. So, this marking on this rock, he later talked about how it could possibly have been made by natural forces. So, anyways, him mentioning this mark on this rock brought me right back to the poem, right? The white mark shows upon the seat, if you can mark warm water's halt. So I believe that at JCB's warm water's halt, you're going to be looking for this rock with these markings. And if you have the Thrill of the Chase book, maybe bring it out on your boots on the ground if you're out searching. And any rock marking or anything like that, just going off the poem, it would be a white mark, I believe, if you're going literally what the poem says. So, thought that was very, very, very interesting that he brought up that marking on the rock in this podcast. So, narrowed it down. Yes, it is in one of the 4 search states, so you can get online, look up Forrest Fenn search area, and check out my other video on it because there are some other things like the search area is between 5,000 and 10,200 feet, and he has a map outlining the search area. And that is the search area that we need to look for JCB's box. So, very interesting. So, let's get into this. So, this hunt has always kind of been really personal. I believe I read an article on Facebook late 2014. It was right before Christmas, and I read an article about Forrest Fenn. And ever since then, I became obsessed with it, did multiple boots on the ground. I live in Grand Junction, Colorado, so I was right smack dab in the middle, so easy drive to New Mexico, easy one-day drive to Montana. So there have been a couple times where I had an idea, and I told my wife, and luckily she's super supportive and said, go. I drive up to Yellowstone, look, come back the next day. So quite an advantage, and that's probably the biggest reason. One of the biggest reasons I'm interested in this box is just because the proximity towards me. And then it's also been fairly personal, and I don't know if I've ever brought this up in a video, but the Forrest Fenn search brought multiple deaths, right? And in this article, it talks about police want a New Mexico treasure hunt to end after 2 months. Funny how they said New Mexico treasure hunt. But anyways, a pastor named Paris Wallace drowned. And yeah, I don't think I've ever said this, but anyways, Paris Wallace, obviously I'm from Grand Junction. Paris Wallace was from Grand Junction as well. Paris Wallace was a local pastor here. He actually married my brother, and that side of the family went to his church. You know, I talked with Paris multiple times. I did not know he was a searcher before his death. So just being that close to a treasure hunting death really put a perspective on it. And then just real quick, it is winter, guys. JCB has made it really clear to be safe. Don't do anything dumb, you know? There's no reason to put yourself in harm's way. So be careful out there, especially if you're searching for this box. It is winter. There is snow. So he also has said that you're probably not going to find it when there is snow on the ground. So if you're searching for this box, wait till spring. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. So, the Forrest Fenn box. It is the first chapter in part 2. I am not going to look for anything in part 1 or bring back anything in part 1 in this video. And because 2 pages before this chapter, JCB writes, to organize things, I decided to segregate the hints and clues for the 4 boxes into their own individual chapters, leaving the rest of the book solely for the clues to our largest treasure box. So, not going to bring up anything in chapter 1. I know there's a lot of discussion about that, but not in this video. So, first things first. On page 203, there is a picture of the treasure chest as shown on my screen. It is a hobnail styled treasure box, which he also does bring up in the American Treasure podcast, episode 3. So, interesting. He said it felt like it fit the theme. I don't know if that's the exact wording, but he said something along those lines. So I thought it'd be interesting to look up the history of the hobnail safes. And I'm going to read. The first hobnail safes appeared in the United States around 1826 and were common from the 1830s on. Hobnail safes were not intended to protect items from theft. Rather, they were designed to be fireproof. They were meant to store and protect valuable documents, loans, contracts, wills, etc., not money. So interesting. They weren't designed to protect from theft, but rather fireproof, right? And then this next article says they have wooden bodies, and the wood was soaked in salt water prior to making the safe, so it would be more fire resistant. And then the steel would be interwoven with the wood to protect it. The big round heads all over the exterior are why they are called hobnail safes. A fun thing about these units is that one or several of these spikes move sideways to cover the keyhole. And let's see. Yeah, so fireproof, right? Brings us back to the poem, or at least it does in my mind. The Camper's Blaze. Now, could this be a hint that the Camper's Blaze is not necessarily like a fire ring or, let's say, a marker for a campsite? Something to think about also. When JCB hid these treasure boxes, he had to have thought of the possibility of a non-searcher finding the box. So, this area areas where he hid these 5 treasure boxes, it has to be outside the realm of someone outside of a searcher finding it. So, hidden near a campsite would be, in my mind, extremely likely. I don't know if extremely likely is the wording I want to use, but it would be a possibility that someone would find it. Obviously, I live in the Rocky Mountains. I've been camping my whole life, and any time you're camped somewhere, you always wander around your campsite, right? Especially if you have kids. So, just a thought. Maybe the camper's blaze was a fire, and you're stopping just beyond the burnt line of trees. Just a thought, right? So, let's go on to what JCB wrote in this chapter. Okay, so he talks about he went to Japan, he came back because he was dating Kimberly, and he didn't know what he wanted to do. He was burned out on the music business, and, he always dreamed of different careers. So I'm going to jump back to the poem and then back to these paragraphs, like I said when I made the video of going through the poem. So, he dreamed of different careers, which brings me to the poem, right? It's nestled all in a dream. And some of these different careers involved race car driver, mountain climber, monk, and paleontologist. So, two that stick out to me are mountain climber and paleontologist. Just fits with the treasure box being within the Rocky Mountains. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of these or multiple of these fits with the final solve. So these options required a much younger body, and some of them demanded lifetime commitment. So he said, at some point I asked myself, what about being a treasure hunter? They had always been on the might do if I had an extra me list. A whole bunch of hyphens there. I let the words rest on my lip. I closed my eyes, envisioned this life. This next paragraph, I believe, is paramount to solving the poem. And I read, I saw a regal sea vessel cutting through the water. There it was, standing steadfast on the bow of that ship, facing windward. I felt the crisp, salty breeze flowing through my long locks of golden hair. A telescope held by my sturdy hand aided my vision as I marked out my ship's path across the open sea. The waves splashed up and, okay, hold on. Daydreaming is fine, but there were some practical matters to consider. So there are multiple things within this paragraph that tie back into JCB's poem. The first is water, obviously. Cool water flows, warm water halts. So, water. And then you have his long locks of golden hair. In the poem, you'll have I miss the golden bending stream. And then he said the telescope marked out the ship's path. So, white mark shows upon the seat if you can mark warm water's halt. So, the next one is daydreaming. And he brought up dream before as well in the previous paragraphs. So, multiple different references to the poem here. Now, I don't know how this can help, but some sort of ship and sea theme in this, and I'm going to elaborate on that further as we go along. But I feel like that paragraph is paramount to figuring out the poem. Definitely sticks out because the rest of this chapter is him talking about the Forrest Fenn hunt. So, yeah, very paramount, very important, guys. Okay, so page 205, he goes about realistically trying to figure out how to be a sunken treasure explorer. He would need a ship. A ship needs a crew. He still had his captain's license, which I thought was interesting. But he didn't trust himself alone at sea. He'd certainly need some kind of special sonar equipment. That was a big deal. And then he also wanted an actual treasure to hunt for. So he talks about Googling some sort of hidden treasure in the United States, and the words Forrest Fenn and gold popped up. Forrest Fenn was an art and collectibles dealer from Santa Fe, Arizona, it says. Now, In the first edition, it says Arizona. I believe I've been told that in later editions, he did change it to New Mexico. Now, how you mix up Arizona and New Mexico when you were an avid searcher for 4 years and then just knowing geography, right? There is no Santa Fe, Arizona. So, thought that was really interesting, but he did change it, so maybe we can roll it out. Okay, so he published a memoir and a 24-line poem, which led straight to a treasure box. He didn't need any of the special equipment, and so he made a decision. Finn's treasure would become my new career. But I'm going to backtrack for a second. I missed a key part in this. So he says, I spent the next week researching shipwrecks, oceanic law, sonar equipment, and successful treasure expeditions. So if all we have to figure out where this box is located is this chapter and poem, this chapter is really important, right? So he says, I spent the next week researching shipwrecks, oceanic law, and sonar equipment. When he says he spent weeks researching something, to me that makes it important for us to research. So maybe we need to research shipwrecks, oceanic law, and sonar equipment. My first thought when I read that, just being a past searcher, shipwrecks, one of the most famous solves, I guess, in the Forrest Fenn chase was Molly Brown, the Homa Brown, right? The unsinkable Molly Brown that was on the Titanic, which also, which also brings you to Leadville, Colorado, elevation 10,200 feet. Forrest Fenn put the parameters of elevation 5,000 to 10,200. So a lot of people thought that was a hint to that area, to Molly Brown. So maybe it is hidden in Colorado. Okay, so back to where I was. He says, I wasted no time. I dove in. I read his memoir and his poem. I looked over many years' worth of archived treasure hunter blog posts and chat room discussions around theories and potential solutions. I zoomed in on Google Images. I pored over physical maps. I watched every moment of every Forrest Fenn interview I could find. I read Forrest online Q&As and other books he had mentioned in his memoir. It was a blast. Questions swirled in my head. So there's a water theme going on in here. So he says, I wasted no time. I dove in. I pored over physical maps. Questions swirled in my head. So he has done this a few times in this book that I have caught where he uses certain words like water. And I'm not going to get into it. But he does that multiple times in the book. So I believe that's some way he is hiding hints. So water theme, right? And he goes on to explain that he was fully engaged for months just thinking about the hunt before he left his house to go and explore. He searched from 2016 to 2020, quitting a month before the COVID pandemic, and he spent a few months in the Rocky Mountains. Sometimes he was alone, sometimes he was with his beloved. The clean mountain air filled with smells of sage, blooming wildflowers, and sunshine was my favorite part. Then he brings up this cloning aspect, which I do not believe I brought up, but I think it's interesting that he brings up cloning twice. He'd often joke that if he had been able to clone different versions of himself, he would have enjoyed living different lives. And then again, cloning. Sadly, science does not yet allow for cloning of a full-time dad. So, is he cloning the Forrest Fenn treasure hunt? Surely he wouldn't hide the treasure box where the Forrest Fenn box was located, right? Because obviously Jack knew where it was. I believe Forrest family knew where it was. So, to hide this treasure where the box was found, I believe he wouldn't do that, just from people have knowledge of that information. Okay, so the box was Forrest Fenn's box was found in 2020 by a man named Jack Stoof in an area where many searchers had originally looked. Conjecture began that Forrest Fenn ended the hunt himself. Emails confirmed to friends he wanted to do so. And a lot of people couldn't believe the box was found in an area where many searchers had originally looked back when the treasure hunt first took place. And you can throw me in that category. It's just crazy to me that it was possibly found there. I made a video explaining that. I don't know. It's just crazy, and you can throw me in that group. I mean, Forrest Fenn chapter in Love with Yellowstone. He even talks about 9 Mile Hole. In the book Flywater, it talks about where warm water's hole. It all was really simple, and maybe that's why it was unfound for so long. Maybe it was too simple. Okay, moving on. Next page, 207. And I wanted to bring up, because there's a lot of talk about the coin, right? Where is it at? There it is, right here. Okay, the Forrest Fenn coin. So Seth Gould made this coin. Now, I do not believe he made these lines, and I know there's been a lot of talk on them. In the past and future box, people have married the angle of the line to the line of, or the state line, I guess, of Nevada and California. So I put this in GBT, and this angle did not match to any of the search states. So anyways, what could it mean? Who knows? There are two lines intersecting. To me, you look at it sideways, it looks like a mountaintop. Maybe that is where you marvel gaze. Maybe that's why it's worth a high, that it's in high elevation, not near a cliff, but maybe on a mountaintop. Okay, so the coin. We went over that. He talks about the auction. It went to auction in 2022, and he acquired 4 items from the Forrest Fenn. In the American Treasure podcast, he does say that he was in negotiations with buying the whole box, but he didn't want to buy the whole Forrest Fenn treasure, so he bought 4 items. He bid on more, but won the bid on 4 items. And one of the items was a wax-sealed olive jar. And come to find out, it is one of the most controversial pieces in the Forrest Fenn treasure box, partly because we believe, or I believe, that it has a lot of answers to our questions. I believe that the autobiography had the solve, where the box was hidden, and possibly some other juicy topics. I think it's interesting. I don't know if it was JCB's original idea to just read the olive jar and its contents and then put it back and be part of this hunt, or if he originally wanted to disclose what he read but feared Forrest Fenn's family, them coming after him and the repercussions from that. So I don't know. But it's interesting that he says that there's more than just an autobiography in it, and he was surprised by what he read. He, in the American Treasure podcast, sorry I keep bringing this up, but he does confirm that there was a second poem in the autobiography, and that's how we would have known if the treasure was found. Now, Dale told us this before, and a lot of people called him a liar. This confirms, yes, Dale was telling the truth. So, very, very interesting. And there is more than just the autobiography. Now, he was surprised by what he read. What could that be? If you do find this box and you have the olive jar, what kind of legal trouble are you going to get into if you disclose what it says? Now, JCB said he met with lawyers, and they told him that Forrest Fenn did in fact publish it once he put it in the treasure box for all to find. So, are you going to get into legal trouble if you disclose what this olive jar says? Is the Forrest Fenn estate going to go after you? There are some things to consider. along with obviously taxes from finding this. If you do find it, there's a lot of questions that you probably need to sit and think about before you make any decisions. Okay, so he said he asked Seth to make a more traditional treasure box. His design is influenced by popular hobnail safes. This one-of-the-kind box is made of steel, carbon steel 01, carbon steel 1075. And it is a puzzle box requiring 3 steps to unlock it. Each treasure box has a different way, or I guess different combinations. 5 with the past and future, and then 3 with this. That somehow could be a hint. He left instructions with the box on how to open it so you don't need to damage it. There is also a laminated clue within this to help you with the lion's share box, which I think is interesting. Okay, so and then he goes and talks about another item that he required, which was the Tenora pre-Columbia necklace. And he says, or I guess he quotes Forrest from his memoir, and it says, "One of the prizes in my collection, a Tenora and Sanu Indian necklace from Colombia. It is also a part of the treasure. It contains 39 animal fetishes carved from quartz crystal, carnelian, jadeite, and other exotic stones. But special to the necklace are 2 cast gold objects, one a jaguar claw and the other a frog with bulbous eyes and legs cocked as if ready to spring. I held the 2,000-year-old piece of jewelry one last time and could almost feel its ancient power, its supremacy, before I finally lowered it into the chest and closed the lid." So John states that Forrest Fenn, called him out pretty much, was incorrect about the age. And as we have found out from the Forrest Fenn hunt, Forrest Fenn was incorrect about a lot of things. Which, I don't want to say this, but it kind of diminishes from the legitimacy of the hunt. I know Forrest never really put a number on it, but I mean, the numbers kept growing from 2 million to 3 million, and Forrest never really corrected that. I believe it was like $500,000, $600,000 worth of stuff in the treasure box, and all the pieces were auctioned off for like 1.3 million. So, yeah, Forrest was incorrect about a lot of things, which, is what it is. Okay, so going on. Forrest was... Okay, so the Forrest Fenn treasure was comprised of mostly gold and gold nuggets, and one other piece that he collected was a 2.25 ounce Alaskan gold nugget from the Forrest Fenn box. And I think it was the 6th largest nugget. So the 4 pieces that he acquired were the Tenora necklace, the autobiography, and then there was a small bracelet of tubular gold beads from Colombia around 500 to 1000 AD. And then the last was this 2.25 ounce Alaskan gold nugget. So those were the 4 pieces that JCB acquired and he put in. Now, all 4 of these pieces most likely are not in this. He does say at least one of these is specifically in our treasure box, although maybe more. So we know that the autobiography is in. Now, I really hope that he put the Tenora necklace in there, just because that was one of the major things in Forrest Fenn's box, I believe. And so I really hope that that piece is in this as well. So I think it's interesting. In the American Treasure podcast, he does say that he put items in this box just in case a searcher that wasn't involved in the Forrest Fenn hunt and is not too particularly interested in Forrest's autobiography, that they still would be excited if they did find this box. Okay, so his final nod to his experiences looking for Finn's treasure was he wrote a 24-line poem in the style and stanza of the one Forrest included in his memoir. His poem is inspired by his own experiences searching in the Rocky Mountains north of Santa Fe. As you may be curious, I have traveled to all four search states in Forrest Fenn's treasure search area. So, yes, it is in one of those four search states. Get online, look at his map. The box is within Forrest's map that he included in his book Too Far to Walk. Easily found online. Easily found online. Sorry, I've been stumbling over my words this whole episode. I apologize. Okay, so while you don't need to know Forrest's poem in order to solve this one, you may want to go online and read it to give yourself some additional context. But everything you need to know to arrive at a fairly close search area for a hobnail treasure box can be found within my poem below. So, that is it. That is the Forrest Fenn chapter. I'm not going to go over the poem. I recently just did an episode that went over it line by line. And so if you haven't checked that out, check that out. And there is some interesting stuff. In the American Treasure podcast, I keep bringing this up, guys. You need to go check it out. There's a lot of stuff that I haven't brought up in this. But he mentions about how Forrest Fenn's poem could have fit thousands and thousands of different places, right? Within the Rocky Mountains. So, similar wording that JCB uses in his poem, and honestly, his poem could fit thousands of different places. So, JCB was a searcher. He knows that. He knows how hard and difficult it was, and Jack solved that by Forrest Fenn's slip up on one of his interviews or something along those lines. Forrest Fenn slipped up. Jack found out where Forrest Fenn wanted to die and then reverse engineered it and then used the poem to figure it out, right? We don't have that luxury right now. Now, I'm hoping as more podcasts and interviews come out, maybe we can get some more information. Maybe there is a slip up. I know JCB is going to be very tight-lipped, and he understands that every single word is going to be analyzed. So maybe he's going to be a little smarter in that aspect. But, we had 3 memoirs. I mean, how many different things did Forrest Fenn do? Interviews, scrapbooks. He sat down and did interviews with Dale, and, there's so many different things that we had to go off of to find it, and it went 10 years. All we have for this is a handful of interviews and 1 chapter. So JCB knows that, and to make this solvable, there has to be something within this chapter to help us. And something that I just went through is going to help someone figure it out. So, anyways, that's it for this episode. I hope whoever finds this box is not intimidated by the Forrest Fenn estate and does release what his autobiography says and the extra thing that was included in it. I hope that information is released. I hope we get a little closure. But, ultimately, that's up to the finder. So anyways, guys, that's it for this episode. In my next episode, I want to go over the American Treasure podcast and go over what JCB says and the questions and possibly how that could help us solve some of these boxes. Also, I want to go over the children's book, Our Unbreakable Thread. Now, there's been a lot of talk. Tennessee being in one of the images, maybe if you flip the book upside down. If you think about how we would hide hints in a children's book, the first thing that pops out is obviously the images, right? Looking through the wording, not too much, so images are mostly what I would think you would have to look through. So maybe there is an image of a state in there. I mean, there's so many different things you could make to be a hint in the pictures within that book. But there's 2 major things. Two major things that are so blatantly obvious in that children's book that I have not seen online or read it or anywhere else. Maybe there has been discussion about those two things, but I personally have not seen them, and I just can't believe it hasn't been brought up because I mean it directly ties back to two chapters within part 1. So that's going to be a future episode as well, and then I want to do a deep dive into the other 3 smaller boxes and then maybe do a chapter by chapter of part 1. So, anyways, that's it for this episode. I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you in the next.